All right, let's take a look at a solution. I'd like to start by defining a method to determine the frequency of a given word in our words array. So that is to say, how many times does a given word occur in our words array? Let's define the method and give it a name, frequency. And it will take a single argument, let's say word. To find all the words that match our global words array, we can use a filter, an array filter, which is of course just a block argument. So let's say array equals $words, that's the global words array. We're going to select, in other words, filter our array. Now I'll pass a block argument to select, but you need to be very careful here. You can't call it word because that's the name of the variable we're using as the argument to the method. So there's no way to distinguish between the two. So instead we should say call it sample. Now in our block we need to define the condition by which we're filtering in our select. So we can say word equals, remember that's our equality operator, sample. So let's call this method to see how it works. I'll use the p method, remember that's just a shortcut for doing an inspect on a puts. And I'll say frequency, and let's try it with the word the. What happens when I run it? So I just get an array back containing all of the objects inside of the array. But that in itself is not very useful yet. What we want to know is the number of times that word occurred. So I'll modify my method to return the size of the filtered array. Of course, the last line in the method will be returned in this case. I could, of course, say return, but it's not necessary here. And now I get 3, which is the number of times the word the occurred in our input string. So our frequency method works well. Next, I want to associate each word in our input array with the number of times that that word occurs. One way I could do this is by using an array of 2-element arrays, the first element in that array being the word itself and the second being its frequency. This is similar to a key-value pair, and when you learn about hashes, you'll learn more about how to use these. Let's define an array called frequencies. We'll start by finding the unique words in our input string. So we can use the .unique method to generate a new array, which is simply all of the unique words in that input array. And I'm going to map it. So that is to say we are going to generate a new array, which is a converted, some sort of translated version of the input array. And we'll pass it a block argument. In this case, I'll just use word. And I'm going to generate a new array which contains 2-element arrays. The first element will be the word itself, and the second will be the frequency of that word. Like so. It's a little bit hard to get your head around this, so let's print it out and see how it looks. Once again, I'll use P, and I'll just print out frequencies. Now you can see an array containing 2-element arrays, and each of those 2-element arrays is kind of like a key-value pair. You've got the word, say here, Stacy, and the word Stacy occurred 2 times. A little further along, we're back to our word the, and that occurred 3 times. So now we have a data structure that's sort of like an intermediate state. It makes things a little bit easier for us to work with. Next, we want to take those frequencies and we want to sort them. We want to show the words with the highest frequency first. Well, as luck would have it, of course, Ruby has a built-in sort method. So let's define a new variable called sorted, and this will be the sorted 2-element arrays from our frequencies. So we'll take frequencies, we'll call it the sort method, and pass it a block. Now remember here that sort takes 2 block arguments. Let's call them A and B in this case. And these are the 2 arguments that we want to compare in order for the sort method to determine which is higher and which is lower. But in this case, we actually want to do the reverse sorting. So we're going to start with B. We want to show the highest first and the lowest last. And actually, we're not sorting by the element itself, Because each element is a 2-element array, once again containing the word and the frequency of the word, we actually want to sort by the second element in the array, or the last element in the array if you like. So to get that, we're going to use -1. We'll use our comparison operator, and we'll compare that to A minus 1. So this is comparing the frequency in B to the frequency in A. Let's print out our sorted array to see how that looks. Right, so now you can see that AND, unsurprisingly, is the most common word with a frequency of 3, but for and the also have a frequency of 3, so they're at the beginning of the list. Then you have Stacy, Google, in, TaskRabbit, and of. They all had a frequency of 2. So the sorting has worked, but let's break down how the sort method is actually doing what it's doing. If we use put statement here, and I'll put a string in here to indicate what's happening, we'll say comparing, and use interpolation, B minus 1 to A minus 1. There are 2 operands to the comparison operator. So you can see the Ruby method sort is actually comparing each of the frequencies in order. So it's hard for us to know which word it is. We'd have to print out A0 and B0 instead. You can see here that Ruby is trying to determine the order by basically comparing each pair one by one until it determines the appropriate sorted order. Now finally, we want to print our sorted words out. Let's use each to iterate the sorted array, and we'll pass each element in the array to a block. We'll call it word. But remember here, each element in the array is actually a 2-element array, so maybe it's better if we call that pair. Now I can use puts to print out each pair word. So we'll say, using interpolation, pair 0 will be the word itself, and pair 1, or we could also say -1, because in a 2-element array it doesn't make any difference. 1 will be the first element, or -1 will be the last element, and we can print that out. And I'm just going to add the word occurrences to make it a bit easier to read. Let's take a look. All right. Each word is being printed along with its number of occurrences in reverse order. So once again, and, for, and the at the top, and right down the very bottom is ventures with 1 occurrence. Note that there's no particular ordering for words with the same occurrence. We could go one step further with this printing and use each with index. Each with index will take 2 block arguments, the object itself, and also the index of that object inside the array. So I'll define that here with the variable name index. I can include index at the beginning of my string here with a colon to make it a bit more readable. And that's just going to give me like a list order. So and will be number 1 and the will be number 2 and so forth. And all the way through the words in our ordered list. Think of it kind of like a ranking. So each with index gives us an index. But because each with index is a method on an array, and arrays are cardinally indexed, it's starting at 0. But maybe that's not what we want. You think about anyone that wins a race, they don't come 0, they come first. So we want that to be ordinally indexed. So to do so, we can simply add 1 to our index before printing it out. And now when we run it, we start at number 1. So there you have it, a histogram in Ruby.